Hey everybody, it's D from D&D Ditches, and today the D stands for dust collecting, which is exactly what these have been doing for the last couple of months. It's been too long since I've done an unboxing, so let's crack these open and see what's inside. Okay, this first one is from Noble Knight Games. There are several items in this bundle, but let's have a look at Tome of Magic first. So this book was originally released in 1991. You can see there on the back where it says 1991. However, this is a reprint. So in 1995, TSR released a revised version of the second edition Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master Guide, and the Monstrous manual. You can tell as these books have this black border which frames the artwork. I call these the black label products, and I like these a lot because of the consistency and the cohesion when it comes to second edition products. You can tell exactly what product line this belongs to. And for comparison purposes, I have a copy of one of the original prints here. I got this from a bulk sale where the seller was selling a bunch of second edition books, which included a lot of the complete books which I didn't own, so I purchased this bundle first. But I specifically wanted this version of the Tome of Magic. I believe this is the 7th printing. This is a hardcover. There was also a soft cover version of this as well. And the reason that I specifically wanted this version, this was the version that I saw in the shops when I started playing Dungeons & Dragons. My first D&D book was the revised second edition Player's Handbook, so I have a lot of love and nostalgia for the black label version of these books. And I just prefer the presentation of this version compared to the original. I believe all the pages inside are exactly the same. And I was looking for this version for a long time. It doesn't come up very often, and the versions that do tend to come up are the soft cover version, and I specifically wanted the hardcover. So when I saw this listed for sale at Noble Knights, I grabbed it. And as it all tends to happen, since I bought this book, I've seen it for sale like 4 or 5 times. And in better condition. I mean, this one is okay. And the funny thing is, the older version of this book that I own is actually in better condition compared to the newer print, because this one is pretty much near mint. Anyway, let's have a flip through. On the inside of the cover, you can see this is dated 1996, and as soon as you start flipping through this book, you'll see that the interior layout uses the classic second edition template. All of the original second edition books were all laid out like this. They all had a blue trim up the top, and each page is divided into 2 columns, whereas the revised second edition books had a different interior layout. So even though they've updated the cover to be in line with the design of the revised second edition books, the interior remains unchanged. This book, The Tome of Magic, introduces a lot of new spells. It also introduced a lot of new ideas to second edition, including new spell schools. Wild magic was introduced in this book. These days, specifically if you played 5th edition, wild magic is a subclass for the sorcerer class. Back in 2nd edition, sorceress did not exist. Sorcerer was a 3rd edition introduction. Back in 2nd edition, wild mages were specialist wizards that are similar to mages who specialize in a specific spell school. Wild magic was a separate spell school. It has spells like Nahal's Reckless Dwemer, which only wild mages can use. Wild mages do not have an opposition school the way that the other specialists do. They just take a flat penalty when trying to learn a non-wild magic, and we're looking at the Wild Surge results, which is a D100 roll. Now, I absolutely hate wild mages. I thought the idea was fun, and I tried it out for a bit in Baldur's Gate 2. They introduced the wild mage into Baldur's Gate 2 via the Throne of Baal expansion for anybody who played the game back in the day. I played the class for about an hour, and my favorite spell ended up being Power Word Reload, so I said nope, never again. It also introduces the Elemental Wizards, which are specialists that specializes in an element. It also introduces meta magic and quest spells for priests. So back in 2nd edition, priests and clerics only got spells up to 7th level, so quest spells were kind of implied to be at an even higher power level, and you would not use one of your regular spell slots for the quest spell. The quest spells kind of like indulged upon the priest when they're on a quest or a mission that is specifically of interest to the god that they worship. And there are other new concepts introduced in this book. We've got faith magic, co-op magic. There are new spheres. Spheres was something that was used exclusively in 2nd edition. They're kind of a little bit like a domain domain, and it's governed by what portfolios that the god that you worship has power over. If I was to use an example, one of the sphere in the original rules is called plant, like power over nature and plants. Nature gods like Sylvanus or Demeter from the Greek pantheon, I would say, would give their followers major access, meaning they can cast spells up to the 7th level, whereas a god like Artemis, I wouldn't say her portfolio directly interacts with plants and nature, but she's kind of like a woodland goddess, so she would have minor access. Minor access means that they can cast up to 3rd level spells, and someone like Athena would grant no access to the plant sphere. So these are just the new spheres being introduced, so we go straight into the spells. The spell names that has an asterisk next to it are wild magic, for example Nahal's Reckless Dwelmer. This is a 1st level spell and was featured in Baldur's Gate 2, and what happens is that a wild mage can use it to try cast any spell in their spellbook. Let's pretend the wild mage is level 20 and they can cast 9th level spells. So the wild mage can use Nahal's Reckless Dwelmer to try to call Meteor Swarm, a 9th level spell, using a 1st spell slot. There is a spell there. This spell forces a wild surge, so you have to roll on the wild surge table and you have to get a positive result in order to be able to cast Meteor Swarm using your 1st level slot. Let's go back to the wild surge table. Let's say you roll a 79, which is target is charmed as per charm monster. So it's not a negative effect because you would have tried to cast the spell on the enemy anyway. So even though this is not a negative effect, what will end up happening is that you try to cast Meteor Swarm, but you will cast Charm Monster instead. The Wild Surge does not take place in addition to your spell effect, it replaces your spell effect. So in order to actually pull off Meteor Swarm, you would have to get something like a 73 where it says, spell is cast, material components and memory of spell are retained. So the description of the Wild Surge needs to say that your spell is cast successfully, may or may not have additional alterations. 99 says spell has minimum duration of 1 turn. This means that your instantaneous spell will persist for 10 minutes instead. That's crazy. 100 says spell effectiveness increases 200. So this is your double powered Meteor Swarm. So I've not looked at every single entry, but most of these says that you cast something else instead. And there are only 3 of these that I can see within this page that says the spell is cast successfully, meaning the primary effect of Nahal's Reckless Dwelmer is to force a Wild Surge and hope to get something beneficial. And trying to get the spell that you want to cast out of the 1st spell slot is unreliable at best. Just showing off the piece of artwork. So this is one of the reasons why I hate the Wild Mage, because the spell description tries to sell you this spell as being something that's really powerful, but it's not reliable at all. And you really have to be willing to go with absolutely anything to really enjoy playing a Wild Mage. And I think the concept of Wild Magic is quite different back in 2nd edition. In 5th edition, you're just playing a sorcerer that occasionally could get a surge that does something random. But back in 2nd edition, you actually have exclusive spells that only the Wild Mage can use, for example, Wild Strike. This is a 6th level spell, and the target of Wild Strike, when they fail a saving throw, will have all of their subsequent spells cast within a certain amount of time be subject to Wild Surges. You can decide whether the effect is worth a 6th level spell slot, but the point being, this is a Wild Mage exclusive spell. 8th level introduces us to Abidelzen's Horrid Wilting, which does 1d8 points of damage per level of the caster and is uncapped. This is one of the best damage spells in Baldur's Gate 2. 9th level gives us some really infamous spells like Chain Contingency and Well of the Banshee. You know, I could have sworn that Well of the Banshee was in the original player handbook. I didn't actually realize it was added in Tome of Magic. Now we move on to the priest spells. The spell names with an asterisk next to it indicates a cooperative magic spell. So I think these ones require multiple casters. This piece of artwork is also on the box called Deck of Priest Magic, I think it was. In 2nd edition, there are a lot of priest spells that don't really do a lot of things, and a lot of the times your party member expects you to take healing spells anyway. So spontaneous casting was introduced in 3rd edition, and what that means is the cleric can memorize any spell that they want. However, at any point they can convert one of their memorized spells into a healing spell of the same level. So for example, 4th level Defensive Harmony, you can use spontaneous casting to convert it to the healing spell of the 4th level, which is called Cure Serious Wounds. So that way you can still use it to heal for an emergency, but if you didn't didn't need the healing, you can cast the spell normally. So when I run my next 2nd edition game, I'm going to convert this rule back to 2nd edition. This rule didn't exist at the time, but I think it's a fantastic rule because it gives your priest characters the flexibility to take anything that's not a healing spell and still being able to heal and be no worse off during an emergency where they really need that healing. So there are a lot of priest spells in this. A lot of these I have never heard of, and I don't know how popular most of these spells are, and if you have played 2nd edition using the Tome of Magic, let me know down in the comments what you think of these new spells. The only parts of the book that I've read through previously were the parts at the start where it introduces the Wild Mage and some of the other new concepts, and the actual spells I've not looked at. So any spells that I know, I recognize them from a game like Baldur's Gate 2. The last 30 or so pages are dedicated to new magical items. I did an unboxing a couple of months ago where I got the deck of magical items, and one of the cards that I pulled was the Liquid Road. Essentially, it's a potion that you can sprinkle on some type of a liquid and it hardens it to the density of granite. Hence, it allows you to form solid ground out of liquid, unless you traverse terrain that would otherwise be difficult to get across. The appendices are at the back, which also includes the original spells from the player handbook, and then divide it into schools, just in case you're looking for a particular spell from a particular school or sphere. And that is the Tome of Magic Revised Edition. The next one we're going to look at is called City Sites. It was released in 1994, and there were 3 books contained in the series. In one of my previous unboxing videos, I've gone through a book called Castle Sites, and the 3rd book in this series is called either Country Sites or County Sites. I'm not sure if there's an R in there. And what this book entails, it provides you pre-made locations in a city that you can just drop into your game. You see that it provides you with the map, the NPCs, and also quest hooks on how you can incorporate these sites into your game. For example, for this first one, a character fitting a PC's description was seen near a lonely crossroad where someone had ambushed and killed a ducal messenger. The one at the scene was really a rune using Change Cell spell. Not only does White Tree suspect the PC of murder, but also aiding a greater spy ring, and dogs the character to make her arrest. So Arun and White Tree are obviously NPCs introduced in the write-up, and this is a hook on how you can get the PC to this site. This next one is Dawn Singer, and this one has more evocative artwork so you can see what it looks like on the outside, in addition to the maps. Previously, when I looked through Castle Sites, it was the same kind of idea, but it was about introducing castles and keeps and fortresses into the game, whereas this book concentrates more on like places in a city. We just had the Civic Temple, and then the next one is Pantheon. This also looks like a bit of a temple with an attached cemetery with probably some undead trolling about. Okay, so I think this one's quite interesting because it's a literal court of law. I've always thought courts were quite interesting in Dungeons & Dragons. I've always wanted to run it in a game, possibly with your PCs going on trial. I also had an idea where one of the player characters will be on trial and then have another player character be the defense attorney. I've always wanted to run that idea. And I had an idea of running it in my Planescape game in a very perverted version of a court. So then we have an inn. This is the Cracked Mug. This is a shorter one. And then this is another tavern called the Double Rose. Looks like a fine establishment. And then another one called the Rusty Clam. I don't find inns and taverns to be that interesting. Generally, a lot of existing modules would already have a lot of inns and taverns, and it's generally how you start the game anyway. So the next one is the Red Clover. This is more of a shop. And then the next one is the Glowing Ember. This is a smithy. And the Three Golden Rings. This is a jewelry store. Another idea that I also wanted to run is like a heist scenario in a high-end boutique. I just love the idea of having players case the joint and be on stakeout. And when they finally break in, they find that there is a jewel thief who got there before them. And now they're going to have to compete with a jewel thief. And the next one is Shell's Cottage. And that is the end. City Sites. This book feels fairly stock standard. I feel like creating an inn or a tavern or a shop isn't really that difficult, so I don't know how much utility you could get out of this book, but it's definitely great to have options. This next one is called the Mystara Monstrous Compendium Appendix. Normally these books will be followed by a number, but this was the only Monstrous Compendium released for Mystara, so this is the only one. It was released in 1994. Now Mystara is the basic or the BECMI setting. Basic and Advanced D&D were two different games, and for the longest time they didn't want to mingle them, and hence the basic setting was known as Known World at the time. In 1994, TSR decided to make that cross-compatible with 2nd edition, and they called it Mystara. Mystara is a kitchen sink setting, means it has absolutely everything. They just keep piling things on and just incorporating them all into this Mystara umbrella. So there's Known World, Hollow World, I think Blackmoor is in there, Savage Coast, Red Steel, and so on. I'm not really the expert when it comes to the Mystara setting. So let's give this a flip through. Because I'm not an expert when it comes to Mystara, most of these monsters I do not recognize. I would say that Mystara didn't have a proper campaign setting in 2nd edition. So I've done the unboxing for Karamakos and Glantry. Both of them were released as box sets in the Mystara setting, but they came across as more of like a premium adventure rather than a campaign setting, as the lore and the world building that were provided were only just for those cities and the regions of the world, and it's a very large world. So you would really have to look at the basic products. I believe there was a series called Gazetteer that covered the rest of that world. I have not started collecting any of the basic products yet, as my heart's definitely in 2nd edition. One of these days I might start looking at the basic stuff, but in the meantime there's far too many 2nd edition products as it is. So here is one monster that I know, the Nakpa. There were two arcade games released in the mid-90s called Dungeons & Dragons, Tales of Doom and Shadow over Mystara. So in the second game, Shadow over Mystara, the final villain was like a sorceress, red dragon type of thing, and she had a Nakpa as her second in command. So I recognized this monster in that video game. So it's like a humanoid wizard with a bird head essentially. So the other monster that I remember is in Mystara there are no dark elves, they have shadow elves. That was another thing that was featured prominently in that game. And there is the Turtle. Lore-wise, Turtles originated from the Savage Coast, I believe, and it's another part of the Mystara world. And that is Mystara Monstrous Compendium. And then we move on to the Vortex of Madness and Other Planar Perils. It actually released very late into the 2nd edition era, in year 2000, believe it or not. The same year as when 3rd edition came out, but it was not the last product. It says on the back that these adventure sites can be used with a Planescape setting or any other advanced Dungeons & Dragons game world. So Planescape was cancelled in 1998, allegedly, when Wizards of the Coast bought TSR, and they looked at the financial data and the sales for Planescape was really not good, so they canned it. But they still released several planar products in these black label books. They're what I'd call not Planescape books, because I think had Planescape still been around, these books would have been released as Planescape books. So the purpose of this book is that it introduces 5 planar locations that you can insert into your game, whether this is Planescape or otherwise. So the 5 chapters, we have the Vortex of Madness in Limbo, the Black Acropolis in Kasseri. The book also calls it Tartarus, and Tartarus is the 1st edition name for Kasseri. And then we have Leoness, I'm not exactly sure what plane that belongs in. And then the Citadel of Gith Reborn in the Astral Plane, and the City of Glass in the Plane of Water. So this is a 96-page book. These not Planescape books, as I call, have a fairly bland presentation. It's just black and white artwork. The first chapter, Vortex of Madness, takes place in Limbo. This site is also connected to the existing artifact machine of Lum the Mad, which is an existing artifact in D&D lore. I believe it came from the Greyhawk setting. So the book covers this full location in Limbo, which is the chaotic neutral outer plane. And you have these grey box text where it refers to the machine's quest. So it seems like this whole entire quest has been pre-built and pre-written for you, and all you have to do is just insert it into your game, and you're ready to go. So there it gives you more history about the Machine of Lum the Mad. So I talked about Baldur's Gate 2 early on in the video, and I'm going to talk about it again because in the Throne of Baal expansion, you also encountered the Machine of Lum in that game in the Watcher's Keep, which is an optional dungeon. So from what I remember from this machine, it's this ginormous mechanism, and it has like cranks and levers and buttons and other things that you can push. And by pushing certain combinations of things, it's going to have different effects. That was how Baldur's Gate 2 ran it. So there you go. The first adventure involves an artifact and takes you to the plane of Limbo. So now we'll look at chapter 2, the Black Acropolis. This is located on the prison plane of Kassiri, which is located between neutral evil and chaotic evil. It's also called Tartarus as inspired by Greek mythology. In Greek mythology, Tartarus was where Zeus exiled the Titans. So the shtick with Kassiri is that most of the Titans are here and they're not able to leave. Given Kassiri's place in the entire multiverse is the prison plane, it is extremely difficult for native inhabitants to leave. So I just saw in the grey box here where it says the Machine's quest. It seems like this quest from the Machine of Lum is carried over to all subsequent adventures, or can be at least. There's the map of the region, there is the River Styx, which runs through all of the lower planes. And there we have a piece of artwork of this monster. It's like a 12 or 15 headed dragon. I'm not sure if that's one of the Titans. Obviously, I've not read through all of the text, but this story involves two of the Titans. We have Mnemosyne or Mnemosyne, probably saying that wrong, but also Themis as the two Titans involved in this adventure. And then we move on to Leonis, which looks like a demiplane of invention. So within the lore of Planescape, planes are infinite, demiplanes are finite. And demiplanes also float within the ethereal plane as kind of this pocket dimension type of thing. So because of this, you can create an infinite number of demiplanes of any type, essentially. Given this is the demiplane of invention, it looks like this is more of a steampunky setting. Here is a map. Here is a piece of artwork of a flying contraption. It's obviously built out of technology. And these adventures provide you with adventure hooks on how to incorporate them into your game. And chapter 4, we have the Citadel of Gith Reborn. If you played and beaten Baldur's Gate 3, there is quite a bit of lore when it comes to the Gith. So the backstory of this one talks about the Gith and Vlaakith, as it sets up this adventure in the astral plane. There's a lot of artwork about the interiors of this keep, but what does it look like on the outside? Not exactly sure. If you're interested in finding more about the astral plane and the Githyanki, I recommend the book Guide to the Astral Plane. It's a really good read. And the final chapter is the City of Glass. This is a large city situated in the plane of water. We have a full-page map and artwork for the city. The City of Glass is also known as Sigil of the Elements, implying that it's a bit of a central hub when it comes to the inner planes, as it's been compared to the City of Door's Sigil, being that Sigil is the nexus of the multiverse. So a lot of the merchants and politicians and diplomats and whatnot comes to the City of Glass kind of like a neutral place to meet, given that the water genies, the Merid, don't really concern themselves over the matters of the inner planes that much, because you have the Dal and the Ifrit who are notorious slavers for the inner plane, and then you also have the Jinn, the air genies, who are good aligned, and they're constantly in conflict with the Dal or the Ifrit. So therefore the plane of water is a bit more neutral than the other three elemental planes. The City of Glass has been mentioned in other products, including the book called The Inner Planes, but this is the first time where the City of Glass has been fleshed out to this extent. So this book arms the DM with a lot of material on how to run the inner planes and suggestions on the kind of adventures and mission hooks that you can do using the City of Glass. And there we have it, 5 new locations for you to insert into your game. I would say it is a Planescape book, it's just that it's not labeled as so. Being able to tie in a famous artifact as well, given that this is for high level heroes, or high level adventures needs high level threat. And even if you wanted to run lower level adventures, that chapter on the City of Glass is going to be really invaluable if you take your adventure into the inner planes. Next up, we're going to take a look at the Maztica trilogy of adventures, Fires of Zatal, Endless Armies, and City of Gold. I have covered the Maztica campaign setting in my AD&D Settings Explained series. I will link the video here if you want to find out what the setting is about. As Maztica, the continent is located on the same planet, Toril, and to the west of Faerun, the continent which the Forgotten Realms setting takes place in. This was a very limited line. The only Maztica products that TSR released were a trilogy of novels, Ulatos, which came before the playable setting, and then we had the Maztica campaign setting box set, followed by these 3 adventures. So we're going to take a look at the first book, Fires of Zatal, first. This book was released in 1991, the same year as the Maztica campaign setting box set. Now it comes with a poster map, and like most of the adventures released during this era, the cover is detachable, and on the inside is a map of Helmsport and Ulatos. So the Maztica setting is essentially fantasy Mexico. Specifically during the period after Spain would have invaded and colonized Mexico, and in Forgotten Realms, the country that is the stand-in for Spain is Arm from Faerun. However, instead of conquering the New World like our own history, Arm set up colonies in Maztica and more or less lived with the locals harmoniously because there was a bigger threat, the threat of monsters. If you watch my Maztica retrospective video, I'll go through all of its history on exactly what happened prior to the event of present day. Ulatos is the coastal city. This is the city that is on the east coast of the ocean, and I believe the Sea of Swords is the ocean that's between Faerun and Maztica. Ulatos is where all of the ships leaving to Maztica would land, and Helmsport is the colony that the Omnians built, which is located very close to Ulatos. Present day, Helmsport and Ulatos is kind of like a twin city, and this is also a melting pot of cultures. We have immigrants from Faerun traveling to Maztica, bringing with them their technology, their language, their religion, and their culture, and they're mingling with the locals in Ulatos. So this is one area in Maztica where you are able to find both types of people. This is an adventure designed for levels 1, 2, 3, so it's for fresh new characters. And matter of fact, the very first words that you see in the book is arrival in Maztica. The book assumes that you just arrived fresh off the boat, and we have a few pages describing the Helmsport Ulatos area. In my Maztica video, I complained about the base box not giving much detail on the Ulatos Helmsport area. Because they want you to buy this product, it seems like that they withheld this information from the base box. This makes a lot of sense because obviously you only have a limited amount of space, so it's not possible to cover everything. But I am happy that at least one of these books provides the information on this area because it's obviously designed to be a startup area for new players and new characters. So road to Nexol. Now Nexol is the capital of Maztica. We are given some random encounter tables for the different types of terrains. Nexol was the capital of Maztica and the largest city, but this is also the city that's now been taken over by monsters due to an event that's now been referred to as the Night of Wailing. Reading the summary on the back of this book, this adventure directly references the Night of Wailing, as on the Night of Wailing, the gods of Maztica fought, as well as Helm, as well as Lolth. It was a bit of a winner-takes-all battle royale kind of thing. And on that night, a powerful magic item by the name of Cloak of One Plume was lost. So it seems like in this adventure, someone caught wind of its location, and the player characters are tasked to go and retrieve this cloak. So there's really no artwork in this book to speak of. The only illustrations that we've got are maps. Even the cover uses recycled artwork. This was the cover of one of the novels, and there were 3 books in the base box, and that was also the cover of that book as well. So art budget for this book was 0, apparently. And this adventure is called Fires of Zatal. Zatal is the name of the volcano that is near Nexol. And any activity related to Zatal is typically seen as like an act of God. Generally when Zatal erupts, people think that the gods are angry and time for more sacrifices. Towards the end of this book, we have some new monster entries, and this is where we also get some precious new artwork. So we have Ahoy Zotol, and now we have Tabaxi. As if you know your lore, Maztica is cited as the home of Tabaxi. This is where Tabaxis come from. And I did make a mention in my Maztica video that Tabaxi was nowhere to be found in the base box. So it seems like this is the module where it gets introduced. And then we have the Maztican dragons, and that's it. So 3 new monsters. They're pretty cool actually. And just looking back on the table of contents again, so we have pull-out pre-generated characters, which are these characters in the center of the book. Seems like this product was designed around player accessibility, so you can give out these pre-generated characters and start playing immediately. After reading the original Maztica box, one thing that I had in my mind was, what does a Maztica adventure look like? And it seems like for anybody who wants to play in Maztica, this would be a highly recommended module, so you can get a feel for the setting and what kind of adventures and what kind of stories could be told in this. Now let's have a look at the map. This map is one-sided, so firstly we have the map of Nexol. We also had a map of Nexol in the base box, but we are also given a Zatal. and Tizat. So Zatal and Tizat are the two cities that's closest to Naxor. Here we have a map of the region which shows their relation to each other, as well as the map of Mount Zatal, the volcano. And the smaller one is called Mount Popol. The next one is called Endless Armies. They're finally given an art budget because this is a new cover. This book was also released in 1991. And this adventure is designed to 4 to 6 characters of levels between 4 to 6. Once again, the cover is detachable, and instead of having a poster map, the cover is extended with an additional panel showing the map. So this adventure takes place in Farpayet, which is a peninsula on the eastern coast of Maztica, and Ulatosh, which we looked at from the previous adventure, is kind of situated like here-ish. And Ulatos belong to the region called Payet, which is sort of around here, and this is called Farpayet. So going back in time, and I've covered this in my previous video, prior to the modern age and prior to the coming of Arm, there was a period in Mastica's history called the Golden Age of Payet. So during this time, both Payet and Farpayet were the most advanced places on the entire continent. So they were very advanced when it came to the art, culture, languages, architecture, medicine, and they were very progressive, and they're still very progressive compared to the other cultures on Mastica. This adventure takes place in the city of Ixtzul, which I would imagine is where the circle is. I can't remember, but I don't think this city was mentioned in the base box, as the capital of Farpayet was Tulum Itzi. So I like this, they're expanding on the lore of the setting. We also have a map of the Valley of Ixtzul. This adventure is only half the size of the previous one. Property of Ryan Sethman. Ryan, if you're out there, I have your book now. So the premise of this adventure, Ixtzul was a long-forgotten ruined city in Farpayet. Ixtzul's original founders made a pact with a great monster that entered the fertile valley from space, a local god known as Hekalos, the star worm as recounted in previous centuries. As with so many cities, Ixtzul went from insignificance or importance to oblivion. So then what happens was that a priestess of Helm named Morandos came across a scroll from the legends, and she wanted to create her own power base in the true world. True world refers to Mastica. So she took the scroll and she's gone into Farpayet, and the player characters are tasked with the mission of trying to stop her. So that is the premise of the adventure. Given the level recommendation is between 4 and 6, I would imagine you can just reuse the same player characters that you've just gone through the previous adventure with. There we've got a piece of artwork on the city. There is another piece of artwork. So there's what looks like the star worm, and then there are also these ant-like creatures you can see on the front cover. They kind of look like Formians. Formians are a race of ant people from the plane of Arcadia, but as we get to the end, we are provided with the new monster entries, and the ant creature is called a Bakar. It says they're intelligent enchanted ants created by Hishna and Pluma magic as guardians of the sacred site Ixtzul. So Hishna and Pluma are the sacred talon magic and feather magic. There are gifts from the gods. And the star worm is Hekalos. It is a hopefully unique creature found in Mastica. Appears as a monstrous centipede with a black chitinous shell. Obviously that's the final boss of sorts in this adventure. And that's Endless Armies. And now we're going to look at the City of Gold. This one says an adventure in Mastica for all levels of play, and it was released in 1992. It was also the final Mastica product released. Now this book feels really massive, look at how thick it is. There is also a poster map on the inside. So it says on the book, somewhere in the true world, to the north of the lands you know lies the City of Gold Michaka. It is the city of legend, of fable, and of wonder. So I do remember the city of Michaka from the base box. On the continental map of Mastica is located to the northwest. Once again, the cover slips off, and on the interior we have a map to Michaka, the City of Gold. Once again, they got an art budget this time. This cover is completely new, and it seems like we have some new interior artwork. This is a monstrous 96-page book. And the reason why it's so thick is because not only does it contain an adventure, it also provides some new lore and new resources. So for the first 28 pages or so, we've got some new lore, some extra world building for the City of Gold, and then in the appendix section, we also have some new player options as well. There are 3 new rogue kits: the Clown, the Fetishist, the Trader. We have 1 new warrior kit, which is the Hunter, and 4 new priest kits. We have the Azupozi Healer, Bent Priest, Kue Polo Priest, and Sun Watcher. New proficiencies, magic, and equipment. So it starts with an introduction on Mystara, the City of Gold, and then it goes into new campaign resources on the geography and new places of interest, the daily life of the people in this region. So there are some new lore, what they think of spirits and their priests. There is a piece of artwork. And then the different spirits. So it seems like these people worship the spirits instead of the Maztican gods. So for all intents and purposes, they're of a different people and a different culture. Part 2 is when we get into the adventure, which is called Quest for the City of Gold. Even though the cover says this is appropriate for all levels of play, Quest for the City of Gold is appropriate for a party of 4 to 7 characters of levels 5 to 8. It is structured flexibly, however, and relies much more on role-playing and intelligent problem-solving than brawn and magical power. Adventure is relatively linear. Most second edition adventures tend to be, which is not really a problem if you're upfront about that and your players are okay with that. The adventurers are joining the NPC players' attempt to find Mystara, the City of Gold. In the base box, Mystara was mentioned, but there wasn't really any real information about it apart from the fact that this is a legendary city. So an adventure about discovering a legendary city is always really interesting to me. So we get to almost the center of the book, and the appendices are located right in the middle of this book. The page numbers starts with A. I don't think this is a great formatting choice. Maybe they've done it so that if you want to, you can just pull the center parts out without compromising the structural integrity of the rest of this book too much. I would never do that. I would personally put all of the appendices pages at the back of the book so that it's not interrupting the flow of the adventure. There's the illustration. So the role of the clown seems to be similar to a jester, where it says they have a role in ceremonies and they can openly mock authorities and say a lot of things without getting into trouble, which is one of the things that jesters were allowed to do in medieval history. So this is more of a kit for role-playing flavor and don't have a lot of mechanical benefits when it comes to gameplay. The next one is Fetishist, and their benefit is that they can use talismanic magic, which is something that's introduced in this book. Rogues being able to use magic is not really a new thing, as the Pluma Weavers and Hishna Shapers from the base box are also considered rogues. And the last rogue kit is Trader, and they have a benefit when it comes to trading and economics, and says that they always have the first pick of the goods. And the Hunter is the warriors of this new culture that's been introduced. As for the priest kits, these priests all have slightly different access to the different spheres of magic. There is the healer and then the bent priest, and they're also able to use the talismanic magic. And then the Pueblo priest, I don't know if I'm saying that word properly, again has different spells allowed. And then the Sun Watcher, this is a priest who uses a spear. Then we have the proficiencies, and this is the part where it goes through fetish magic and talismanic magic. So with talismanic magic, the priest is able to create an item that they can use to enhance their spells. So it's just regular magic with a bit more of a quirk to give it some more flavor. So there it says dog people. Now the dog people are actually humans. They're just humans of a different tribe and they live to the north. They're not dog-like humanoids the way that their name makes them sound like. They're not like Tabaxi but more dog. And here we have the map of a city. And towards the end of the book where we get to part 3, which is further adventures, which are hooks and ideas on how to continue the story. So it provides you several options on how to proceed further and expand on the story. And it's up to the DM to use these ideas to continue the adventure further. So that is the book. And now we're going to take a look at the map. So here it is. It is a vertical map. So there is Mystara, the City of Gold, to the northwest, and this region is typically where the dog people reside. And the bottom half of this map provides you a zoomed out version, where the map we just saw covers this rectangular section, and the map is expanded to show the other surrounding regions. So even with this zoomed out version of the map, it's still very far away from the other parts of Maztica, you see there's the arrow where it says City of Koltaka. And Otomi is all the way to the south here, which means if we scroll this further, Nexala is like here. And that gives you an indication of how far away Michaka is. And that is the City of Gold. So out of this package, I got the Forgotten Realms Adventures and the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 1st edition Oriental Adventures. Now let's have a look at Oriental Adventures first. Now this book is quite infamous. This book was released in 1985. It was released for 1st edition, so the cover has Gary Gygax's name on there. There's a channel called Daddy Rolled One where they break down the history of early Dungeons & Dragons, and that channel has spoken quite a bit about Oriental Adventures. Now, because I am not a D&D historian, if you want to find out more about this book, I will link their channel in the description of this one. So according to Daddy Rolled One, Gary Gygax came up with the idea for this book, but this book is written mostly by David Zeb Cook. So Zeb wrote most, if not all, of this book. So I'm not a big fan of 1st edition. I started with 2nd, so I don't have any nostalgia for 1st at all. I always thought 1st edition had horrible art, and I get that they didn't really have a budget for much of the artwork. When I was younger, it never gelled with me even when I did go back to reading the 1st edition stuff. So I don't set out to collect a lot of the 1st edition books, but I picked this one up because I own the Karator Oriental Adventures campaign setting, and I intend to cover that at some point as part of my AD&D Settings Explained series. However, the campaign box set only covered Karator as so much as the continent, the world building and the lore, and the different places and the kingdoms and the countries. It didn't cover anything to do with like player options or gameplay mechanics. So obviously that setting is about playing Oriental flavored characters. If you want to use any of the Oriental flavored races or classes, you had to get them from this book. And this is the section where it goes through the new races. Now, I don't know anything about this book apart from the fact that it's quite controversial, especially these days, as this is clearly written from a Westerner's perspective of how they perceive Eastern cultures. So, you know, there's talks about cultural appropriation and all that good stuff. So this is the section where we have the Eastern flavor classes. We have barbarians, bushi, kensai, monks, ninja, samurai, shukenja, sohei, and wujen, and yakuza. The next chapter goes into families, clans, and castes. So you might have noticed, I am Asian myself, I am Chinese, but I don't immediately look at this book and say it's racist. It clearly has some element of appropriation, as this is clearly Eastern culture interpreted through a Western lens, but I tend to see it as creative fiction. And I'm curious to dive into this book at some point, just to see the type of ideas that's included in this book. Obviously, if this is something that I don't like, then I won't run it. And everybody has that choice to like something or not like something for whatever reason. So if anybody who doesn't like this book for whatever reason, then, you know, don't play it. It's really just as simple as that. So this book has gone through a lot of player options, new races, new classes, some new ideas on family and honor, caste systems, equipment, and the different spells being altered. And then we get into the section about combat. Clearly this is written for 1st edition combat rules, but the good thing about 1st and 2nd editions is that they're mostly cross-compatible. Obviously, monks are not a playable character in 2nd edition, and these pages are going into a lot of martial arts and unarmed attacks. So I guess if you wanted to play a monk, you can either use the 1st edition rules. I'll look through some of the 2nd edition books. I think some of the later complete handbooks has some monk kits that you could use. And then towards the back of this book, we have some monsters. Most of these monster entries have no artwork, but they did release a Monstrous Compendium for Karator in 2nd edition, and I had a flip through it last night, and I think some of these, if not all of these, have been converted into 2nd edition. So for example, this one, Xing Xing, which is what they call a gorilla in Mandarin Chinese, and the artwork for this monster is just a gorilla. Obviously, a lot of these monsters are based off of Japanese, Chinese folklore and mythology, like for example Kappa, that's Japanese. The Kappa is like a frog type of creature. And then at the end we have treasures and magical items. And then the last few pages we have an overview of Karator. I think at this point TSR still don't know what to do with Karator, this Eastern Continent Oriental Adventures type of setting. As this book was released in 1985, it's not until 3 years later in 1988 where the Karator campaign setting box set came out, which I have looked at as part of one of my unboxing videos from last year. And then some maps at the end. Something else this book was infamous for was introducing non-weapon proficiencies to AD&D. So these days, if you want to use a skill like stealth or persuasion or athletics, these are part of the skill system, and skills have been in D&D since 3rd edition and onward. Non-weapon proficiencies are the early rudimentary version of skills being introduced into D&D. For example, you can pick up proficiencies in the artisan crafts like armorer, blacksmith, jeweler, potter, and you can use that during the game to craft something or try to do something which involves that skill to try to, say, complete a quest or something. And there are all of these other proficiencies that's been added. Non-weapon proficiencies would then be carried over into 2nd edition, but as an optional rule. You don't need to play with that rule. Some DMs like it, some DMs don't. I generally go back and forth about whether I'm liking it or not liking it. When I run my next 2nd edition game, I'll probably start with not using non-weapon proficiencies, just to get the players and myself used to the 2nd edition rules again, because it's been a long time. And then maybe I would try it once everybody's comfortable. And part of the reason why I don't like it is I feel like it restricts creativity. So we'll use a proficiency as an example, say etiquette. Let's say there is one person in the party who has taken etiquette. Players who are not trained in that skill won't actually think of a solution themselves because they'll think, oh, I can't do that because I don't have that proficiency. Some of them might share the idea and tell the person who has it trained and say, hey, maybe you could do this. Some of them will just shut down and say, well, I don't have that skill available to me. I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to be the one who's going to be able to solve this situation. So it turns into a game of what I cannot do rather than a game of what I can do. And that is a big proponent to why I don't like it. But you know, there are pros and cons to everything. So overall, I think this is an interesting, curious book. I'm curious to read through it. And that's Oriental Adventures. Next up, let's have a look at Forgotten Realms Adventures. Now, this book was written in 1990. So looking at these old books, something clicked in my head. A lot of us associate campaign settings with a box set, and that's exactly what TSR did in the 2nd edition era. Generally, when you get into a new campaign setting like Dark Sun, Forgotten Realms, Planescape, Ravenloft, Spelljammer, you start by purchasing the box set that we all know and love. But in the late 80s, they didn't really go with that box set strategy. A lot of the campaign settings were released as a blank Adventures book. So we just looked at Oriental Adventures, which is the precursor to the Karator setting. We had Dragonlance Adventures, Greyhawk Adventures. They even did Arabian Adventures for Al-Qadim. So all of these adventure books came in a hardcover. But then I think at some point that they just decided to put everything inside a box set and have that as a starter product. So this book, Forgotten Realms Adventures, was a bit of an oddity, as there was a transitional period between Advanced 1st edition and 2nd edition. 2nd edition came out in 1989, but between, I say, 1987 and 1991, that 5 or so period, as we knew that 2nd edition was coming, as Gary Gygax himself, before he was ousted from TSR, was already working on the 2nd edition. And after he left TSR, 2nd edition was written by David Zeb Cook. Originally, the Forgotten Realms campaign setting box set came out in 1987. It was written for 1st edition. I've also looked at it as part of my unboxing video from last year. And because 2nd edition came out in 1989, there was only a 2-year period where that box set was current. So by 1989, that box set was already made redundant. And TSR was thinking, well, we just released the box set 2 years ago. We're not going to reprint that and rewrite everything. So what they did instead was release this book called Forgotten Realms Adventures, which released a year later in 1990. And this book serves to bridge the gap between the original box set and updating it to 2nd edition. There are certain classes that were no longer available in 2nd edition, like Thief Acrobat, Barbarians, Monks. assassins, and the half-orcs were no longer playable. The other thing that happened during this time, there was a trilogy of novel called the Avatar Trilogy, and it covered an event called the Time of Troubles, which really changed a lot of things in the realms. Certain gods died off, there were new gods. For example, Cyric is one of the new gods that came around due to the Time of Troubles. So the first chapter that I just skipped through was called Post-Avatar, where it covered the Time of Troubles and how to convert the classes over to 2nd edition mechanically. So chapter 2 of this book goes through all of the gods in the current pantheon. What I really like about this book is the illustration for all of the priests of each god. During the Time of Troubles, all of the gods of Faerun got cast down into their mortal form. This is the reason why some of them died, and if you played Baldur's Gate 3, the lore of that game does cover the Time of Troubles a little bit, because that was the event when the Dead Three died. And after the Time of Troubles, Walking, the goddess of trade, did not return to her divine heritage, as she actually went missing and her whereabouts was covered in a Planescape adventure. So chapter 3 goes through magic and mages in the realms. Now I spoke about wild magic and wild mages at the beginning of this video when we looked at Tome of Magic. This section of the book introduces some new magic spells, for example Aganaza's Scorcher, which was featured in Baldur's Gate 1 and 2. And the reason I brought up wild mages is because wild magic actually came around due to the Time of Troubles, because at the beginning of Time of Troubles, the goddess Mystara was killed off. And after Mystara died, magic became unstable. And that's the idea where wild magic comes from. So this piece of illustration are the 4 heroes of the Avatar Trilogy. There is Cyric, who usurped at least some of the Dead Three's power. There is Adon, the cleric of Sune. Kelemvor was the fighter, and Midnight was the wizard. Midnight eventually became the new Mystara, and Kelemvor became the god of dead. I believe he took over Merkel's portfolio. I have read through the first book in the Avatar trilogy back in the day, so I do remember a little bit. The next chapter is Cities of the Heartland, and we have a map of Faerun and the major cities. These days, when you talk about the Forgotten Realms, everything happens on the Sword Coast. I mean, if you look at this map, Neverwinter and Waterdeep aren't even mentioned. When the realms were originally conceived, I believe they wanted to have most of the adventures to be taking place on the eastern side, such as the Dale lands. I mean, Elminster lives at Shadowdale, but as the setting went on, more and more adventures took place on the Sword Coast, for example, the Baldur's Gate video games, and then Neverwinter Nights, and so on. And when you get to 5th edition, the realms outside of the Sword Coast kind of just don't exist. This section provides you the information on all of these cities that's on that map, and Waterdeep is not included in this book. And I think the reason for that was they released 2 separate supplements for Waterdeep. There was a box set called City Systems, and I think the other one was just called Waterdeep. Those books were not that old at this point, so if you wanted to run something in Waterdeep, it's not very difficult to find a copy of one of these Waterdeep supplements to use for your game. And then chapter 5, we have Secret Societies of the Heartlands. These are the factions like the Harpers and the Zhentarim. 35 years later, it's still the same factions. As I said, the purpose of this book is to tie you over from the 1st edition box set from 1987 until TSR would eventually release a box set for Forgotten Realms for the 2nd edition in 1993. So between 1990 and 1993, if you wanted to play in the Forgotten Realms using 2nd edition, this would have been the book that you needed. Potentially also with the 1st edition box set, because you saw there are certain regions or certain towns that's not being covered in this book, or you would have needed to purchase another product like City Systems or the Waterdeep book if you wanted to run a game in Waterdeep, for example. So there we go, that was 154 pages. And that's Forgotten Realms Adventures, which will go on to be superseded by the 2nd edition Forgotten Realms campaign setting box set. There are 2 books in this package. We're going to look at this one first. It's Country Sites. This is the 3rd book that I mentioned in the Sites trilogy of books. Like I said, I wasn't sure if it was called Country Sites or County Sites, and it was released in 1995. This book is 96 pages, and I would imagine it will be similar kind of idea as City Sites that we've gone through early on, except this one's obviously covering sites that's located in a rural area. So the first one is called the Haunted Temple. Now this is more of an Eastern flavored. It says this place is cursed by the Chinese god of agriculture, Liu. And as we just looked at Oriental Adventures, this one is on theme for this video. It's funny because I've just chose some random packages to open up, and these products all kind of relate to each other. And the next site is Sanctuary in the Sand. This one looks like it's more of an Arabian themed site. Maybe it would be good in Al-Qadim. And then the next one is called City of the Dead. From the illustration, looks like this is more of an Egyptian themed site. We have a sarcophagus and mummies. These are obviously burial mounds. And then we also have hieroglyphs. And then the next one is the Mariner's Graveyard. And it says that the Sargasso Sea is a large region of the North Atlantic Ocean off the southeastern coast of the United States. So this one might be a bit more Caribbean themed. And then the next one is the Island of Lost Souls. And this one says, deep within Bayou country on a man-made island at the edge of a slow winding river is Getting Jail. So this is more of a prison themed site. And then Darion's Wall. The write-up of this one makes mention of the Great Wall of China and also Hadrian's Wall in England along the border of Scotland. These are clearly the inspirations for this site. And then we have The Place of Broken Dreams. Most of these write-ups make references to real-world history. This one makes mention of the Black Death of the 14th century in real-world history. The story of the site introduces a new disease called Novayaha, which is a condition unique to elves and half-elves. And it seems like this is the place where people who are afflicted with this disease would go to. If we look at the adventure hooks, one of these says, a patient in the place may hold the key to the nature of the disease. So if we look at the adventure hooks, one of them says, a patient in the place may hold the key to the nature of the disease or a variation of the disease, may result in oracular powers that suggest a cure. So it's a bit morbid, but I think also a very interesting premise. This one is called The Fiend's Bridge. So most of these are fairly short. The Fiend's Bridge is only 3 pages long. So these will suggest smaller adventures perhaps, or the DM would need to do some additional work to expand on them. The Toll House and River's Edge. And then the last one is The Cashel. So that was country sites. This one seems to be a lot more interesting than city sites. First of all, it's drawing on real-world history as inspiration, and some of these are a bit more unique and different to the typical places that you would normally see in a D&D game. The next book that I have is the Ravenloft adventure called Chilling Tales. It's for 3 to 8 players between levels 3 and 9. The back of the book says 7 gripping settings, 7 Nightmares adventures. It was released in 1995 and seems like this one is an adventure anthology. Once again, the cover is detachable and on the inside we have the NPC stats. These look like they could be the bosses of the adventures, as we have Greater Mummy, Fledgling Vampire, Vasalich, Ghosts, Werewolves, and so on. The back of the book also makes mention of the Van Richten's guides. So it seems like the monsters being used in this module take advantage of some of the new rules and some of the new lore being introduced in these Van Richten's guides, which is really interesting to see, as the Van Richten guides are my favorite Ravenloft products back in 2nd edition. So the first adventure is called Through Darkened Eyes. This one is designed for 4 to 8 heroes between levels 3 to 6. These all seems to be quests that's given to the player characters by Dr. Van Richten. In this adventure, one of the Vistani tribes ousted one of their own called Lomar. So Lomar has become a Darkling. I believe these are some of the new concepts being introduced in Van Richten's Guides to the Vistani, which was also released in 1995. Seems like each one of these adventures does a little bit of cross-promotion with the Van Richten's guides, because if you look at them, each one of them is of a different type of monster. We have vampires, mummy, lich, werebeast, ghosts, Vistani, and this one for Madman, he's probably related to a flesh golem, if I was to hazard a guess. These adventures are not very long, they're between 8 to 10 pages. And then we move on to the next one called Undying Justice. And this is the adventure which includes Thomas Danderick, so this is the ghost one. 3rd magnitude Ghost, Chaotic Neutral. This is interesting. Ghost is not completely evil. 3rd adventure is Gazing into the Abyss, and this adventure involves the Lich, designed for 4 to 6 heroes between levels 4 to 6. And this adventure is set in the library run by the affiliates of a secret society known as the Kagatane. And they serve the Lich Arzalin, who is the Dark Lord of Darkon. And then we move on to Family Feud. This one is for 3 to 4 heroes between levels 4 to 6. This is a very short adventure. It consists of just these 2 pages. As you see, the second page already talks about the aftermath. And obviously this is the one that deals with the werewolves. And then we move on to the Surgeon's Blade. It's for 3 to 4 heroes between levels 6 to 8. And this is one which involves Emil Bollambard. He's the surgeon. So I'm a little bit intrigued on trying to find out what kind of monster this adventure deals with. Golem Guardians, Flesh Golems. So I was right, this is the Flesh Golem adventure. Ravenloft really like its gothic horror tropes. When it comes to a scientist or a surgeon, they generally play on the Frankenstein's monster type of trope. And then the next one is the Scarlet Kiss. This one is for 3 to 4 heroes between levels 7 to 9. So it seems like with a little bit of work, you might be able to chain all of these adventures together. This is the Vampire Adventure, Evangeline. You go into the catacombs, and interesting, there is an underground stream. Guess what vampires cannot cross? And then I think this might be the last one, called Ancient Dead. Yeah, 3 to 4 heroes between level 7 to 9. So at least they were kind enough to order these in ascending level order. And this adventure takes place in the domain Harakir, which is the Egyptian themed domain. And there we go, we've got some Egyptian iconography. This is the Mummy adventure. Nope, there was one more adventure. It's called the Taskmaster's Leash. And this one simply says your character should be at least level 7. So the background makes a reference to the Grand Conjunction. The big bad of the final adventure is an Amnezu Bayatuzu. So there's a stat here, Fiends. I didn't see this initially. This adventure actually lied to us. It says on the back that there are 7 adventures, but there are actually 8. If you count these monster stat blocks, there's 8 of them. Each of them signifies a separate adventure, and that's 8 of them all up, even if the werewolves one is super short. So originally they also released 8 separate Van Richten's guides, and these were the 8 that were released. So this adventure was really designed to put all of the ideas that the Van Richten's guides has talked about, and gives you an example on how to create an adventure using these books. So I actually really like this. Don't know about the quality of these adventures. If you have played through this, why don't you comment down below and let me know how good these adventures are. I just really like the idea that they put their theory into practice, because they released a lot of these lore book back in 2nd edition where they just like spoke lore at you, but don't give you any practical examples on how to incorporate that into your game. So I like that they have incorporated it into a game. Hey, thanks for watching. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe for more AD&D 2nd edition content. Until next time, hope we get to hang out again in my next video.